So lots of people have a top 10 list of some kind on their channel. Maybe it's time I had one on mine. As you know, my biggest passion in life is steam engines. I love the history, I love the technology, I love finding out how they work. I love the sights, the sounds, the smells, and the sheer feeling of being near one when it passes by. And all of these things have spawned the production of my ongoing magazine show, Steam Locos In Profile. But which ones are my favourites? Not necessarily the fastest or the easiest to work on or the most attractive, but the ones that I would give most of my time to stop and admire, like any enthusiast would with their personal favourites. Well, that's what we're going to find out here and now. Now, I will say at this point, this list is entirely opinion-based. If you can draw from your own experience, if you have your own opinions, if they don't match those of my own, that's fine. And that's not a problem, nor should it be, because I don't mean to start any arguments. But here's the thing. Just because you haven't played a part in creating or maintaining something, doesn't mean you can't admire it or take an interest in it. After all, lots of people who visit heritage railways, families and so on, may or may not know even half of what a steam engine is like to drive or fire or fix, but that shouldn't stop them from looking at one and going, "Oh, that one looks nice, I'd like to know more about it." Though sadly it doesn't stop some of them from expressing their opinions on how they think a heritage railway should be run, but I digress. So with all that in mind, this is my top 10 favourite classes of standard gauge British steam locomotive. Number 10. The LMS Black Fives. Many enginemen would say you could go anywhere with one of these, and in steam days, they could go almost anywhere. Until recently, the only parts of the network that deemed these engines out of bounds were parts of the Cambrian and Mid-Wales network. Otherwise, there isn't much that could really stop them. Even on mainline rail tours today, their performance, fuel economy, ease of maintenance and reliability seem to tick all the necessary boxes. So they could do just about everything, but, and this is just me, don't forget, they are a bit ordinary and utilitarian on appearance, which is why they're so far down on the list. That doesn't make them bad by any means, because they're really not. It's just there are other engines out there that would turn my head and attract my attention more often. And no, I still wouldn't have painted one in this god-awful colour scheme. What more can I say? The Black Fives are just good machines all round, and there's little to complain about there. Number 9. The Great Western Kings. Everything about these engines is just big. The cylinders are big, the boiler's big, the firebox is big, and look at those slide bars. They're massive! They also seemed a bit unnecessary, as the smaller castles did most of their work with less hassle. So I do have a lot of admiration for the castles, seeing as they're pretty good too, but for me, the Kings just seem to have a bit more character. They're bigger, they're more prestigious, and if crew testimonies are anything to go by, they take more work to get the best out of them. You can call that an Achilles heel, seeing as you'd have to know what you're doing to get the best out of an engine like this, but that sort of imperfection could make them more of an exciting challenge for some people. More to the point, they're rarer than the Bulleids, louder than the A4s, and more substantial than the Duchesses. In many ways, the Great Western King is a bit like the Ford Mustang. Both were faster developments of previous models. Both symbolised everything great about their company at the time. But both were fuel hungry and actually not the best performers. And that is also why they're fairly well down on the list. In short, they may have their foibles, but the King's presence alone is enough to turn my head. Maybe not bow though, because I might strain my back. Number 8. Lion. She's one of the oldest locomotives in the world, built in 1838. But that's not important, because if you've seen the Titfield Thunderbolts, then you'll know that this engine is a movie star, and that alone is the reason why I love her. But nobody's seen her run for a good few generations, and given how time has passed, it's questionable over whether or not she'll ever run again. Neither possible nor impossible, just questionable. So let's move on to NumberSeven. The BR Standard 5s. There are prettier engines out there, there are faster engines out there, there are more sophisticated engines out there, and there are more characterful 460s out there. But as all-round, user-friendly, fast 10-wheelers go, riddles came up trumps with this design. While there are some crews and fitters who would prefer working on other engines to these, and that's respectable in its own right, the majority of people I've spoken to seem to have pretty high praise for the Standard 5s. In fact, some preservationists have deliberately tried to keep their ones going for as long as possible just because they like them that much, even when the engines in question had suffered major failures or constant minor niggles. They may not be my all-time favourite steam locomotives, but they're definitely my choice of the BR Standard range. Number 6. The Princess Royals. Like the Kings, these things are just enormously excessive. Never mind the size of the boiler or the length of the smoke box or the height of the tender slabs, the sheer bulk of the chunky Walschaerts valve gear is enough to make you stop and take notice. And when it comes to liveries, I love the look of these things in LMS Crimson Lake. But the most important thing to remember with these engines is before they came out, no single locomotive could run the full length of the West Coast Main Line from London to Glasgow entirely on its own. There was often double heading or engine changes to handle the climbs of Shap and Beaton. But in 1936, Princess Elizabeth managed the whole 401 miles in less than 6 hours at an average speed of around 70 miles an hour. As a result, her driver Tom Clark was awarded an OBE, and of course the class was developed even further to become the Duchesses, and we all know how the story went from there. So whether you like Stanier or not, his Princess Royals were the catalyst in proving the LNER could be beaten, even if it wasn't for long. Number 5. The London and South Western S15s. Conceived in the early 1920s by Robert Urey, these 460s were more ahead of their time than people give them credit for. Until that point, nearly all 460s had most of their valve gear on the inside, and half of their driving wheels hidden away by splashes on the outside. The S15s changed all of that, copying the simplicity of overseas designs and making it their own, by raising the running plate above the driving wheels and having all the valve gear outside. And yet, they managed to retain the power that big goods engines were producing by that point. Just about every other big UK goods engine from the 20th century was either a 280 or a 210. This was different, to say the least, and in being different, I kinda like that. They might look a bit odd in my eyes, with the buffers and smoke deflectors being a bit small for an engine this size, but really, looks aren't everything. I mean, Bulleids Q1 was an ugly machine, but still a pretty good one. To my mind, the S15s were underrated machines that stood out from an unsung crowd of freight haulers. Number 4. The Great Western 1400s. As I said in my review of this class, these engines are bursting with character. There may be Great Western engines which are faster, more powerful, have greater fuel storage, and don't depend on that complicated auto-train system. But when it comes to pluck and charm, these little engines have something about them that I simply can't put my finger on. When you see one of these with an auto coach, it looks like it belongs. And the fact that 2 of these had supporting roles in the Titfield Thunderbolt adds to that charm. But even without such cameos, they have that certain something on their own. Yes, on their own, no help needed from him. There's a lot of prejudice about the Great Western from many enthusiasts because many of their engines seem to have been traced instead of designed, if you take what I mean. But this is one machine that looks completely different from the massive lineup we usually tend to picture. And if that's what makes them unique, then that's good enough for me. Number 3. The Great Western Cities. This design was one of Churchward's earliest, best looking, benchmark setting, highest performing, okay, you know the real reason why this class is so significant, don't you? City of Truro is at the root of the biggest debate in railway history. Who went 100 miles an hour first? Flying Scotsman, a tested high-performance toppling thoroughbred, or this spindly Edwardian 440? Personally, while I can see the evidence is more in Scotsman's favour, as in, there is some, the thought of this engine at least trying to reach that speed is one that I find hard to resist imagining. That's not to say I believed it happened, but I would love to have seen her try for it. But at the end of the day, Truro, Scotsman, we all know which one didn't make the ton first, don't we? Sorry $9.99, but without sufficient evidence, that's how much your bogus claim seems to be worth. But however you wish to believe the story, City of Truro is one of those unique survivors that will be talked about for generations to come. Number 2. The Somerset and Dorset 7Fs. These were some of the biggest engines to be built by the Midland Railway. 11 of them were made, and 2 can be seen today. So what do I like about them? Well, besides their power, size and proportions, it's their heritage that I find special. They were built specifically for a railway that desperately needed a powerful hill climber in place of the weak and weedy 4Fs initially provided for the work. This made them unlike nearly all mass-produced Midland engines, a big machine going against the small engine policy. And now, they're the biggest surviving artefacts from the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway. Yes, an 8F has better weather protection, is more fuel efficient and may be better at endurance running. But there's something about a 7F which gives it a certain degree of charm. And because they went against the Midland's usual small engine crowd, they're more unique. As rough and raw goods engines go, the 7Fs are absolute beasts. But before we get to my number 1, let's take a few moments to ask the polar opposite question. What are my least favourite classes of standard gauge British steam locomotive? Now, this isn't easy because picking out your least favourite of something you love is a bit like deciding which part of your body you like the least, because let's face it, you kind of need all of it. Nevertheless, I have whittled them down, and in no particular order, these ones are my lowest faves. The Great Western 5600 tank engines. It's not that I think they're bad as such, it's just that I find them a little bit dull. Their styling doesn't do that much for me, their history is a bit basic, and they seem to do their work without making a very interesting noise. I've often said the Black Fives and Standard 4 tanks weren't that interesting, but they generally make up for it by being go-anywhere machines. These, though, were rarely seen outside certain parts of the Western region. I've actually gone out of my way not to film these for slips because there's generally not much I find interesting about them. They're like the Nissan Sunny of British steam locos. They work okay, but there's really not much else to them. Then we come to the London and North Western DX Goods. Somebody once described these things to me as having all the worst traits of a Super D, but with none of the oomph to make up for it. And looking at them in photographs, I can kind of see that. Ugly, crude, underpowered, and basically awful. Over 900 were made, and none of them survived beyond the 1930s. I wonder why that is. Then we come to Bulleids Leader. There are many reasons why I despise this machine. Number 1, just look at it. Number 2, it was supposed to be a replacement for the old M7 tank engines, but they weighed more than twice as much, which would make them a bit useless on branch lines. Number 3, just look at it. Number 4, with its fully enclosed forward-facing cabs front and back, it was supposed to make life more comfortable for the crew. But it only managed half of that because the firemen still had to work in a closed-off cupboard area where the firebox was. A Bulleid Pacific is like an incubator on a hot day, but this must have been like an incinerator. Number 5, just look at it. Number 6, there is no reason. Number 6. Number 7, just look at it. It looks like one of those London Underground battery locos that's been full to the brim with steroids, jacked up and mounted on bricks. It's hideous. Now don't get me wrong, I'm sure Bulleid's initial idea had good intentions. But lots of things start out with good intentions and they can still come off a bit half-assed. But then of course there's my least favourite of them all, the Billinton E2s. Oh, don't roll your eyes at me, you could tell this one was coming from a mile away. Not only were these things rubbish at pulling passenger trains anywhere above walking pace, but they were heavy going on water, underpowered, and had rubbish brakes. They may have found a new use as shunters in their later lives, but they were still outclassed by the USA tanks, which had a shorter wheelbase, more power, and more space in the cab. The only reason anyone likes these things now is because of one little blue embarrassment who just so happens to be based on an E2. So much like the DeLorean in Back to the Future, this is a rubbish machine idolised by popular culture. The difference being Back to the Future wasn't an embarrassment to the motor industry, whereas Thomas sort of is embarrassing to railway enthusiasm. That being said, he's not the biggest embarrassment of all, but again, I digress. So there you have it. You want your E2's review? You've got it. They're shit. Let's move on. And let's get back to the top of the list. Because my number one standard gauge British steam locomotive class is pretty obvious. The LNER A4s. These machines came at the peak of steam locomotive development. In the 1930s, many railway companies around the world were showcasing speed, streamlining, and prestige. And nothing symbolised any of these things more than Sir Nigel Gresley's racing thoroughbreds. For me, this design is the E-Type Jaguar of steam locomotives. High performance, highly desirable, and looks impressive from every angle at every speed. I know there's bound to be some people out there who will prefer their Stania Duchesses, their Bulleid Pacifics, or their Great Western Kings, or if there's something a bit funny about you, a Pacer. But for me, the Duchesses didn't hold the world speed record for very long. The Bulleids came too late with too many faults, and the Kings are just not in the same league. And the Pacers were rubbish. Burn them. Now. The A4s are the quickest, some of the best engineered, and in my eyes, some of the most beautiful machines ever made. Never mind steam locomotives, just beautiful machines in general. Like the E-Type Jag or Concorde, nothing took the world by storm in quite the same way before or since. And after nearly 80 years, Mallard's record remains untouched. Say what you like about what might have happened if the Germans had another go, or if the Duchesses and A4s swapped railways, but the bottom line is what's happened has happened. And as time goes by, the record looks less and less likely to ever be broken. Because here's the thing. Why would you break it now? Since 1938, our idea of high speed has completely changed. We've broken the sound barrier, we've gone into space, and we can now drive inexpensive cars with a higher top speed than that of an A4. We consider messages travelling across the world at less than the speed of light as slow, even if we don't realise it. So unless a steam engine could break the world speed record set by a maglev train, which is highly unlikely to happen seeing as a maglev can achieve nearly 400 miles an hour, then really, there's nothing left to prove. Even when Mallard got the record, she wasn't the fastest railway engine in the world by that point, because this German diesel thingy was. In fact, no steam engine has ever been the fastest thing on rails since number 2509 Silver Link achieved 112 miles an hour in 1935. After that, the tragedy is, steam really did start becoming a thing of the past. So really, unless you're just a group of daydreaming optimists who are looking for something to brag about to their mates, then you're just better off leaving the A4s at the top of the league, because no other steam engine has matched them in the same way ever since. The A4s were some of the greatest steam engines from one of the greatest decades of the 20th century, and that alone is why they are my favourite standard gauge British steam locos of all time. Did you enjoy the case for my favourites? Have you got any favourites of your own which aren't on this list? Or have you simply got time on your hands? Then feel free to leave a comment in the box below and share what you think are your favourites. If you like what you see and you'd like to see more from my channel, then feel free to click that subscribe button. I'm Chris Eaton Green, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.